What I'll be talking about today is no new age idea. In fact, I'd say something which we are quite familiar with. Boiled down to its essence, I'd say it's the reality which we've come to know, or rather, reality as we know it, or the confinement which we've come to mistake as reality, which is probably the case because reality is whatever we make out of it, or that's a strong potential, or a profound aspect of reality. It can be shaped however we desire. We have the power of intention. And so it has been intended for us, for most of us, to live in a state of constant agitation, basically in survival mode. And we know nothing beyond that. The reality we know is only a confinement, which is a byproduct of mental impressions which we've come to identify with, because that's the way we relate with reality, or rather the dissection of reality, which is rooted in the labels that we use to interact with reality. And there's only so many labels. Then what about the rest of reality, or the things that we are not meant to experience through visual perception? What about those things which go unseen, at least unseen by the physical eye? Things like faith. Okay, we hear these words, but what's the reality behind them? What do they symbolize? I'd say that doesn't really matter to us, despite what we might say, because we are comfortable living within the ignorance which we perceive to be comfortable, the illusion of comfort which comes from the so-called bliss of ignorance. And with that point established, I'll swiftly dive into the core of today's message, today's session. What I want to speak about is the resistance, which is unavoidable, which is so obvious. The resistance to change, or rather, should I say the fear of change, which makes sense if you really think about it, because our normal state of being is mainly tied to survival which is characterized by fear. If you're fearful, then you are operating from a state of lack, which from the outside looks like survival. And so we are all over the place. We overthink. We worry way more than we actually need to. In fact, I'd say there is no need to worry whatsoever. But because of what we've come to identify with, what we are accustomed to, we fail to see anything beyond the limitation which we think we know. We don't really know it. We are only familiar with it. We are familiar with a certain way of being which has been passed down from generation to this generation. And so for us, the challenge would be to go beyond the limitations of past, as opposed to leading life the same way it was led by previous generations, the way they related with the experience of life, with themselves as life, or the experience of life as life. And so change is something which seems far-fetched. It seems dangerous to most of us, because it feels like uncharted waters, unknown territory, which, by the way, there's some truth to that, although not in the way we think. It's unknown in the sense that true knowing is unknown, so to speak. That basically implies that by not knowing, or at least by thinking that we don't know, we are more likely to expand awareness-wise, perception-wise, because in that way we give ourselves the freedom, the space to experience life beyond our mental confinement, what we've come to identify with mentally, which we project as reality. Basically, a life experience which has no prejudice, which lacks judgment, at least in a finite sense, in a human mind sense. Because if we take in, or if we experience life symbolically, then it defeats the whole purpose of experiencing ourselves fully. Because that would imply that you have no faith. I mean, you might say that you believe in a higher power, but believe is only a door which can lead to knowing. But you have to surrender without reservation. It has to be an authentic resolve. But what keeps us from change? A peculiar situation took place not so long ago, and it might bring some clarity to the question. So I was spending time with my mother. It was a slow day, intentionally so. I was just chilling that day. And so I was in the living room. My mother found me there, and she was around. Right, and we started spending time together. We are chilling together when all of a sudden I received a phone call, and it was rather a personal phone call. And so I made my exit. And as I'm in the next room enjoying the conversation, I suddenly heard a scream. And the natural thing to do was to go and check out what was going on. As I approached my mother, she's pointing at something like, "Look at that." And I'm trying to see, what is she talking about? Look! Then I finally saw what she was talking about. It was a bug. some insect which I'd never seen before. So I guess you could say that her reaction was somewhat justifiable, because yeah, it was unlike anything I've ever seen myself. It had this, it was like it had this diamond shape to it, and its body was kind of like joined. So the other part was the front legs, the other part of it was the back legs, and both parts were formed like a diamond. It was unlike anything I've ever seen, like alien insect. And so she had a broom. She wanted to kill it, and I stopped her. I suggested that I take it out instead, and so I did that. And she was so cautious, so fearful. She kept remarking that it looks dangerous, it might bite you. I'm like, nah, chill, because as I looked at it, I didn't feel any danger to it. And so I took it out, and I made my way back into the house. And as I walk in, I had this sudden epiphany, a flood of insight. So a connection was formed. Well, I made a connection of the situation to the human situation, so to speak. Things don't necessarily have to be dangerous, although because we don't find them familiar, even though they cannot harm us, but because there is no familiarity, we often fear those things. And that keeps us. It keeps us stuck in old ways. We are never willing to transcend what we know, which in reality is only what we remember. Remember in a limited sense, that is. It's only tied to memory. And so to transcend limitation, in order for change to occur, we have to be willing to walk blindly, because that blindness is faith, and that faith is true knowing. It is the flowing of life which is infinite, unlimited, unbounded, omnipresent, omniscience, omnipotent intelligence, which inherently you are. Just think about the fact that you don't have to think about most of your bodily functions, but the life force, which is you, which you direct, is running all of these unconscious aspects of survival, so to speak. So if or should you give yourself or give control to that intelligence, you can never go wrong. You don't have to trust me, but trust that. Trust the words that I just said. Trust your higher self. Trust life, for it knows what you need. Because you might think you need certain things. You might think you want certain things, only to find yourself wanting more things once you've acquired those things. And therefore, in that way, you don't really change. I mean, your external situation, your external surroundings might change, but you haven't changed. And that being the case, you're more likely to fall back into your old reality. Because the center of the seemingly new reality is still the old core, so to speak. And with that being said, love and light.